Hello, my name is Dr. Guy Lo-Tricchiano. I'm from George Washington University. I'm an associate professor of clinical research and leadership and also the associate dean for innovative and collaborative pedagogy. I come here to MSU as a visiting fellow for Team Scholarship. My background includes research about teams and also best practices so that science teams may be more effective in their work. This is a post presentation from a live presentation that was given at Michigan State University. So I'm going to be providing you with some insights to the major themes associated. The learning objectives for today are to contrast the nature of teamwork over task work, to articulate when teamwork principles need to be explored to ensure smooth task work outcomes, to find the 7 core processes of teamwork, to predict the main challenges to successful cross-functional teams, and to devise a plan that can be used in a cross-functional team to ensure greater effectiveness. The assumptions I come here today with are that we'll be speaking about team members, which may at times be team leaders, but not always. We will cover in the seminar what is meant to raise your awareness about how teams work based on evidence and research from team science. Each team is unique and there is no recipe for checklist for when working in teams, although oftentimes I get asked for that. And no matter if you are a team member or a team leader, your awareness needs to be brought to your context, the group, the team you're working in your organization, or maybe in your science partners, etc. So I asked you to think about what's your task work this week versus what is your teamwork this week. Tasks often involved many things we just need to do in any given day, and they may be team-oriented or they may not be team-oriented, but they all have to do with the completion of our labor into possibly a product or even possibly making connections, creating schedules, talking with people, et cetera, et cetera. You can think about what tasks you today are required to do before the end of your day or the end of your week or the end of your month or even longer periods of time. Task work, however, is not teamwork. Teamwork refers more specifically to the interactions that go on between members of a team. So task work refers to what needs to be accomplished to meet goals and complete objectives. These are the tasks of the team. And you can see here by this animation that we're all familiar with from the Nemo franchise. Dory just keeps working, and she has short-term memory loss, and her world is very much just in the moment and just trying to deal with what she thinks she needs to do at any one point. Teamwork, on the other hand, is really looking at the attitudes people have towards working in teams, the behaviors that they exercise that support interacting with teammates, sometimes called communication, and the cognitive awareness of the knowledge that's associated with teammates, their roles, their responsibilities, and the actual knowledge that's being explored either in your science uh, um, efforts, your goals, your aims, or even if you're working on any other sort of team that isn't necessarily knowledge-based. This is really the more effective side of teaming. This picture here is one of 3 people you know from the Sex and the City franchise. And of course, that's one of our dear politicians, Bernie, and his stance at one of the presidential inaugurations. So as you can see, there's attitudes and behaviors that are going on, and also understanding what each other's roles are, et cetera, that is not unilaterally understood amongst the 4 people. This is just a comical way to express important things that are part of teamwork, which is understanding how trust is established, communication, and then also understanding how the mind interprets roles, responsibilities, and the knowledge that is being either transferred, translated, or developed in your science teams. The science of team science is a field, a multidiscipline that works to understand how best teams work to be effective in the science that they are carrying out. Of course, as many people know today, the gold standard for doing rigorous science is to do science in teams in many different clusters of disciplines and many cross-disciplinary arrangements. So collaborative efforts that address a scientific challenge. They leverage professionals trained in different fields. They study complex social problems, oftentimes very large problems like COVID, global warming, etc., population displacement, that sort of thing. And the promotion of teams and the study of team effectiveness. So this is sort of what the science of team science, the evidence base associated with science, is striving to understand. So let's review. Task work is any number of tasks that you may have to perform as part of your job, as part of your role in a team. Possibly even you could translate that into your organizational requirements that are necessary to be able to do teamwork. But teamwork is really the human aspect of interaction, which includes attitudes, behaviors, and cognition associated with being on a team. And lastly, the science of team science is the evidence-based science that informs how teamwork is done. It's the study of the teams, or you could look at it another way and say it's the study of teamwork. So to talk about highly functional or highly effective teams, sometimes it's easier to highlight what is dysfunctional in teams. So oftentimes, and the evidence shows, that trust is a major contributor to dysfunction in teams. This is when people who belong in different departments possibly, or come from different disciplines, have different relationship, if any, or even prior contact before they're on a project team or a science team. They may not fully understand the functions of their teammates. They likely have few or no prior successes together that can create a foundation of trust and camaraderie. So often people ask me, well, how do you establish trust? And that's a little sticky because it's hard to give you an activity that's going to instantly establish trust. But I often say that trust is one of those things that comes out of good modeling and the way that you want to be treated and the way that you think about the engagements of others and modeling behaviors that ensure that trust can build between teams. It doesn't matter if there are 2 people, it doesn't matter if there are 100 people, but trust will become a very important aspect in what I explained about dysfunction in a moment. Fear of conflict is another dysfunction. Innovations really can't exist without some familiarity between teammates, and a poorly designed or non-existent decision-making process may in fact create conflict. I'm sure many of you have had this experience in your life where you have entered into conflict because of some miscommunication, some misunderstanding, or a lack of communication that has brought people to conflict with each other, enter into conflict. But a dysfunction in a team is when you fear conflict, as if it's something that is going to not produce a positive result. But in fact, conflict is one of those things that gets people to think about their positions, hopefully learn something from the people that they're in conflict with, and provide a vehicle for innovation so that new ideas or blended ideas can come out of conflicts that occur. So fear of entering into those innovative and creative environments is something that can cause dysfunction in a team. Commitment. We often experience a lack of commitment of team members where they may or may not seem very enthusiastic or prepared or productive in a team. And members of a team can easily become dysfunctional when that lack of commitment goes unchallenged or untested, have not provided accountability for that lack of commitment. So if you're working with a team of people uh, that have somebody or a group of people that are expressing how they're not committed to the end goal or the aims of a particular project, that can lead to dysfunction. And the dysfunction comes from a lack of accountability. So accountability is something else you can avoid, and avoidance of that accountability is what leads people into dysfunction in teams. This often comes from not being in an environment where open communication is okay. It's not safe. Where competition takes over instead of accountability and teamwork. There People might be looking out for their own performance, not the team's primarily, and not the team's performance or the team's performance secondarily. And this often provides an environment of low standards. So where team members or team leaders find it unable to hold people accountable, and that will result in lower positive outcomes. As far as outcomes are concerned, results, sometimes we have the opposite effect, where teams are very engaged with each other. They've have a strong understanding of trust. They try to, keep people accountable, but they're worried so much about those sorts of interactions that they lose sight of the fact that the team has a product or results that need to come out of their engagement. And this is where also dysfunction can become um, common in teams, because while the team may get along very well and have few conflicts and able to speak to each other openly and candidly and so forth, if the team loses sight of what it is their objective in working as a team, this can become a real problem. This pyramid shows how sort of the weight of these sorts of dysfunctions and how they play heavy on effective teams. Much of the literature in the science of team science will talk about trust and conflict as really being leaders in dysfunctional teams. And if those can be overcome and established, where trust is established, conflict is seen as an opportunity rather than something to avoid, then commitment to projects, accountability, and attention to results are much higher, much more likely to be achieved in the time period that a team may be working on a particular subject. So you might want to think to yourself, which of these affects your team's ability to succeed? I'm sure most everyone works on a team in one way or another. Ask yourself, which of these of the 5 in the pyramid affects your team? And then if you want to engage in how you're going to make sure that you don't become a dysfunctional team, there is some work you can do to maximize success. First off, establish if you're really a group or a team. Groups usually have a leader that interfaces with other people in two-way conversation, but rarely do those people that are being led by the leader engage with each other, because it's a more hierarchical environment where you have a leader making decisions, handing it down possibly to subordinates, and then subordinates feedback to the leader. Teams are a little more freeform, a little more complicated than that, where the team actually expresses leadership through their interactions with each other and different people on the team. That doesn't mean there isn't a leader, but the leader is part of the engagement with the team. So people work towards a common goal. They coordinate their work amongst themselves. Again, don't want to give you the impression that all teams are formless, but this diagram is more of how team participants work together rather than how they would in a group situation. Another way to look at it is a group model often has individual goals and accountabilities. So an individual may know what they need to do. They have their own goals and they are accountable for what they're doing. However, they don't necessarily contribute to anything that is unilaterally accepted as what we might call the outcome, or they don't have a mental model that they all share that allows them to stylize their individual goals and accountabilities to reach a common outcome. So rather, a team model would focus more on mutual and individual accountability, where the core purpose of what the team's job is at the center. And people or participants in that team are actually designing their own individual goals and accountabilities with an outcome that serves a core purpose. As you can see, it doesn't change that individuals may have their own goals and their own accountabilities, but rather it points or directs those individual goals and accountabilities towards a core or common purpose. Another way to look at it is functionality. This on the left just happens to be an example of people that work together, systems analysts, developers, testers, for instance, but there's not necessarily any cross functionality in what they do. We often worked in teams like this, where one department, let's say, in a unit works on what they work on. In this case, might be analysis, one might be to develop software, the other might be to test the software, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. A cross-functional team is more one that is representative from the various functions and works together so that analysis, development, and testing is integrated, and all team members understand enough about what the other people on the team are coping with, know what their individual goals and accountabilities are, and it's integrated into a team that knows enough across functions to be more effective as a team. There are 7 drivers of teamwork. This is in the title of this talk, which is 7 Things to Know About Teamwork. It comes from a model from a colleague, Eduardo Salas and company, that in 2015 worked to help people understand how you might look at teamwork in a sort of structured way if it's hard to understand what the ins and outs of what teams actually do. This is often called the 7 C's of teamwork. That's intentional, like the 7 C's of our planet, the oceans. And each one is meant to look at processes and emergent states within teams that can be looked at individually or across those processes to really understand how teams work. So for instance, communication. What types of communication are encouraged or discouraged? What does the team decide is the best way to communicate? In person, virtually, between certain hours of the day versus 24/7? Cognition would be the question you're asking, is what does the team know or not know about what the core purpose is? Coordination, what are the intentional ways used to coordinate the team? Cooperation, what are the motivators, feelings, beliefs, attitudes towards working together? Conflict, what are the conflicts that impede effectiveness? And coaching, what is in place so that team members may grow and understand more in more depth what others bring to the table, and possibly a discipline that they're not so familiar with. It's important to understand this always occurs in the context of a culture, the composition of the team, the situation you're working under. It could be in a university, for instance. It could be in an industry environment. It could be really in any environment. These are all affected by the culture that you happen to be working in and need to be considered in light of that culture and the ability of the culture, or say the organization, to support good teamwork. Though I don't speak about this much in this presentation, in the presentation that was part of the keynote that I gave, actually speaks to this with much more specificity, and I hope you take a look at that presentation as well. I'm going to stop there for the purposes of this video, and thank you. The rest of the Collaboration Summit was hands-on, and this was the break during that time. I want to thank you very much for listening to my short presentation. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me. The contact information is at the end of the slide deck when you take a look on the website. Thank you very much.